Gil, welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So before we jump in, I just want to do a plug for your Substack. It's called the Nerd Reich, newly actually renamed the Nerd Reich, which I think is a great title for it. And people, please subscribe and support the work that Gil is doing, because as I just said in your introduction, I think you have done a better job than I've seen of anyone, really distilling what the ideology is, really distilling what the plan is. And I think that is so important as we all try to digest this just massive influx of news that we are all trying to, make heads or tails of. So before we get into Elon Musk specific, can you just give people a little bit who you are, where you came from, how you, ended up on this particular beat of like Silicon Valley oligarchs?
Sure. Well, I started my career as a journalist. The first major newspaper I worked for was the San Jose Mercury News. Back in the dot-com boom in 1998, I started. After a few years, newspapers were going sour, so I ended up working in politics for a long time, for about 17 years. I was a spokesman and communications director for people like Governor Jerry Brown, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris when she was Attorney General. And then in 2018, I returned to journalism as editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee and later editorial page editor of the San Francisco Examiner. And for the past 2 years, I've been freelance, sort of combining my political knowledge with my journalism skills to write a couple of newsletters on the Ghost platform. Actually, I left Substack last year. Ghost is a nonprofit that I used. And that's sort of where I am now, is sort of freelancing. And I started writing this story about tech and the ideology because I felt there was a story not being told. And I wasn't sure why no one was telling it for the most part. There were a few reporters who delved into it. And so I started telling it myself, and here we are.
So, Gil, my first question to start to unpack all of this is just the very basic. Like, what is Elon Musk's ideology, and what does he actually want? Like, what is the end game here? What is he trying to accomplish as he unleashes his Doge apparatchiks in this, attempted coup?
Well, people often make the mistake of thinking this is just about money and tax breaks and fewer regulations. But Elon Musk already has more money than anyone else in the world. Elon Musk already breaks laws and rules and regulations on a regular basis with no consequence. So this is about something far, far bigger than that. This is about power and who gets to wield power in the 21st century. There's a new extreme ideology that has taken root in certain quarters of Silicon Valley, not in all of tech, but in a pretty significantly impactful portion of tech. And it sees that the 21st century is a power vacuum, and it proposes to fill that power vacuum with a new system of governance by tech corporations and the people who control those corporations. And that's very much what this is about that we're seeing today. It's about who controls the 21st century, who has power. And it's also about the idea of upending nation states, countries like the United States no longer being important in the world, and instead having different patchworks of territories, some call them network states, that will be ruled like corporate fiefdoms by some of these tech billionaires.
So talk about what I will describe as Elon Musk's ideological daddy, also J.D. Vance's ideological daddy. Steve Bannon has talked about this guy glowingly. Talk about Curtis Yarvin, who's like the main guy behind all of this ideologically and philosophically, and what his grand vision is.
Well, Curtis Yarvin is a computer programmer from San Francisco who, back in the early 2000s, used to write an online blog as a guy named Mencius Moldbug. That was his moniker. And he has all of these kind of convoluted, confusing, and cherry-picked theories about the need to replace democracy with corporate-ruled monarchies. He used to really refer to it as monarchy and the need to return to monarchism and basically systems of kings. He seems to have upgraded his language to be more framed as a corporate takeover. And his theory is that democracy has failed, and what we need is to run governments and the world like a corporation with CEO dictators who are empowered to have absolute control over the lives of their citizens, and that's just the way things should run. And he's written these ideas out. Now he has a Substack called Gray Mirror, where he regularly writes these long essays about overthrowing the current system of governance and instituting this sort of tech authoritarianism, I think it's fair to call it. In one essay from, I think, 2008, he talks about turning San Francisco into a territory called Friskcourt, where where you have to swipe in and swipe out with a card, and everything you do, everything you look at, everything is captured on a total surveillance system that ensures the safety of every citizen. So basically reinventing Orwell's Big Brother. Curtis Yarvin seems to think he's really brilliant. I think most people with knowledge of politics and history don't see that at all. They see a guy who's really misreading a lot of things to fit his own crazy theories. Unfortunately, people like Peter Thiel do consider him very important. Mark Andreessen, as you mentioned, Bannon and others. And so right now, what we're kind of seeing is his theories being put into practice, although you don't really see that or hear that in any of the coverage of it. And so basically what you have is a guy who was a blogging troll in the 2000s become a major political philosopher for some of the richest men in the world who are now wielding power within the Trump administration.
Yeah, we should just point out that, to your point, these people now have political power. This isn't theoretical anymore. I mean, you mentioned a couple of billionaires there, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel. These are all people who were just recently on the #1 podcast in the world, the Joe Rogan Experience, where Joe Rogan sat there and nodded along in agreement to them for 3 hours straight.
Right.
As they lied about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Labor Relations Board. So this is, they have political power, and they also have cultural sway based on massive outflow of misinformation that they're putting out there on a regular basis.
So when I read Curtis Yarvin's the book The Dark Enlightenment, and I was really starting to dig into these characters as Elon Musk became increasingly influential in the Trump campaign and funneling, an insane amount of money, $250 million, probably more, into the Trump campaign. I was really thinking that the model he had in mind was Trump as the sort of CEO dictator. But it seems now that actually it's Elon who is put into that role. And Trump is the secondary, sort of almost like ceremonial position of more like the chairman of the board. Talk about the political and power dynamic between those two.
Well, in 2022, Yarvin wrote an essay called The Butterfly Revolution, in which he outlined the idea for, instead of Trump in a second administration being at the center of everything, Trump would more act as chairman of the board, and he would install a sort of CEO figure to basically be the dictator of the federal bureaucracy and to start breaking rules, purging the bureaucracy, which is a long-time idea of Yarvin's. He calls it RAGE, retire all government employees. We see that being carried out in DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which I prefer to call destruction of government by Elon, because that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. Then after purging the bureaucracy, you bring in this loyalist army of people to run government with no concern for loyalty to democracy or the constitution of the law, but instead loyalty to the dictator who runs the government now. And then you start systematically dismantling democratic institutions, making sure they can no longer function, they no longer exist. You defy the courts, you defy Congress, you push everything to the brink and see who really does anything about it. Is there any consequence for deciding that Congress doesn't matter anymore? Is there any consequence for deciding that you don't have to follow the laws, especially when you have a president who will just pardon you? And then after that, you start seizing media control, academic control, and sort of reformatting everything so that the main message getting out to people is pro-authoritarian regime, pro-dictatorship, and that it's very hard to get any competing message out. We're not quite at that stage yet. We do see some weird stuff happening, the way the Washington Post and the LA Times have owners now who have become sort of pro-MAGA, or at least kowtowing to MAGA. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll expect to see more of that pressure applied to both journalism and to academia and other institutions. The idea being that we can have nobody publicly challenge this. People have to act like it's normal and go along with it, and that'll give it the best chance of success.
Well, and we've seen some of that already. I mean, the FCC is going after NPR and PBS. They required the transcript to be released of that Kamala Harris interview. Trump himself has been suing various media organizations, and then in several instances, those media organizations, rather than fight, would have likely been winning battles in court, because of course very hard to prove, defamation. There's all kinds of First Amendment protections. Instead, they've just effectively bent the knee, issued what amounts to a bribe to Trump, in the hopes that they can, get their mergers through and go along to get along and not attract his scrutiny or have their executives investigated and potentially jailed.
Yeah, they're self-censoring. It's authoritarianism through fear is what we're witnessing. You pointed out with CBS, they paid him $50 million in the hopes of saying, hey, we're cool. You saw Mark Zuckerberg do that with a $25 million bribe for temporarily banning him for January 6th, which of course was perfectly reasonable. You see it there legally going after PBS, NPR, and you also see it with just Elon taking over Twitter. It was a $44 billion investment. He massively overpaid, but he knew he was overpaying because the whole idea was to control the flow of information.
Yeah.
And so, what we're witnessing is they're already in the stages of the media takeover. And even those outlets that have semi-kowtowed to Trump, right, like the LA Times, for example, or the New York Times, they're not spared from his ire. He still goes after them because it's never enough unless you're a complete and total cheerleader. Is that what you see, Gil?
Definitely. And I see people who are not familiar with how authoritarianism works. You can't negotiate with these people. You can't bow down enough. Any attempt to both bow down and still pose a challenge will be met with further pressure and attacks. So the only way through this is to immediately start to fight back and be resistant to the normalization of this kind of stuff. And it's been very disappointing to see so many media outlets fall short and try to find some mythical middle ground that does not exist. To be in the middle ground with these people, you have to be so far to the right that you have effectively abandoned all neutrality and objectivity. And I think there are a bunch of low IQ cowards running a lot of our media institutions today. And I think if this country loses its democracy, it will be largely due to the failure of journalism to do its job. And I say this as someone who wanted to be a journalist since the 5th grade, and who now wonders if the term journalist won't make people think very low of me, that I'm cowardly or else stupid. So, I think that's been a big part of it. There has been no effective pushback. Part of that has been not telling people what's actually going on. That these people have been talking about this for a long time. It's not chaos. It's systematic. There's a plan. I've compared this to, it's like trying to tell the story of 9/11 without mentioning Al-Qaeda. This wasn't just a bunch of random people who decided to do the same thing at the same time. There's a much deeper idea here. And it's not just the tech guys. We're seeing the right-wing religious establishment as a part of this, the Heritage Foundation. There's a real sort of convening of these right-wing powers that want to remake the world. And they have found common ground, and we're watching them do that. The idea for purging the government appears in Yarvin, back in 2012. Well, it's also in Project 2025 spelled out.
That's right.
And they denied all this, and were able to get away with it. And now we're living through it. This has been a massive failure of journalism in the way that their intelligence agencies failed around 9/11. And it's just amazing that they won't talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the New York Times headlines right now, and here we sit, we know they've taken control of the Treasury payment system. We know that they have illegally and unconstitutionally are disbanding all of USAID. We know they've infiltrated NOAA, which deals with weather and hurricane tracking. We know they've infiltrated the center that deals with Medicare and Medicaid payments. Like, brazenly illegal, unconstitutional action after action as part of a true revolutionary attempted coup. And the revolutionary part, those are Elon's words himself. So you don't even have to speculate or editorialize. You can use his own language about what he's trying to accomplish here. And I'm looking at these headlines from the New York Times. This is on Thursday that we're recording this. Federal workers face deadline to take resignation offer. The Trump administration's major moves so far. DEI skeptics include some on the left.
Just normalization. All this is just normalization.
How are you helping people to make, they're not helping people to make sense of what they see unfolding before them. And so it just feels like normal partisan battle. And Trump's making some big moves and he's really shaking things up. If anything, it makes him sound like he's just this bold, courageous leader, like he wants himself to appear. It really is making me insane. It's part of why I was, really so heartened to at least see your piece. And I do think that there is an organic understanding that exists out there, too, among a lot of liberals and the Democratic base of just how extraordinary this is and the stakes. The whole thing is at stake right now. The whole country is at stake right now. We're living through it.
Yeah, nobody's really telling people that in that way, including, unfortunately, for the most part, the Democratic Party.
That's right.
Kind of operating principle seems to be, well, we're just going to let them do as much as they can and not resist. This is the wrong time to stand up. And then they'll become so unpopular that everyone will vote for us. And I don't think it's going to work that way. I don't think that the Democratic Party understands fully what's going on here, or else, like a lot of other people, they're just too scared to say it. But we do, fortunately, start to see some people standing up, calling out Musk by name, protesting. You've got Ro Khanna now, who sort of tends to play both sides now in a real fight with Musk. And I think that's what we need to do. This isn't the usual thing where some pollster can tell you what the future is. No pollster told us this would be happening right now in the way it is. So the pollsters are flying blind, and we got to stand up, take examples from history of how people oppose these kinds of regimes. And the fight started 3 weeks ago, started before that, really, but there's no time to kind of sit around hoping that people will just use enlightenment and reason to somehow figure out that this is really bad. You got to tell people what's going on. And one piece of good news I saw today on the Drudge Report was that Musk's poll numbers are dropping precipitously. And so I think the number one goal right now for the Democrats and for people in the media who care about democracy is to illustrate exactly how this unelected foreign-born billionaire is destroying our government to the detriment of the American people.
I'm struggling to wrap my mind around Trump's role in this because, to be clear, the plain-faced reading of the situation is that Elon Musk, in many respects, has usurped the president's power and the power of Congress. Yeah. And it seems like with just one text from Donald Trump Jr. about some fake scandal involving a government agency that, you know, Trump is going, and he just sits there and lets this guy destroy the Treasury. I mean, the way it works, Congress has the power of the purse, House passes something, Senate passes something, President signs it, that's it. There is no bureaucratic figure on the back end who gets to say, I don't like this payment, or I think this one is fraudulent. That's not a thing. But here's Musk and his little pilled up 20-something-year-olds who are going directly through the code of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and freezing programs they don't like. And Trump appears, if anything, to be cheerleading it on. I mean, he's given interviews where he just outright says, like, yeah, he has whatever he's doing, my authority is given for him to do it. Like, he's still trying to pretend like I'm the one that's really making the decisions here. But it appears to be just a cover story because he actually thinks Elon is some sort of mega genius who's going to clean up the fraud or something.
Definitely. And I think that's a powerful thing for people to understand. In politics going back centuries, there's an old frame of the puppet master behind the person who's supposed to be the leader. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, even Republicans, we're seeing some of them have some suspicions about this. It has saddened me greatly to see that the only person talking about this stuff in the way that I have been on a regular basis has been Steve Bannon, who's doing a great job of illustrating all the vulnerabilities that these tech bros, these oligarchs, these nerds have in the MAGA audience, which is they're into weird stuff like living forever and transhumanism and basically mating humans with machines. They don't really believe that America is the best country in the world, which is not the kind of thing you could tell to a red hat wearing person in a state like Kentucky, where I spend a lot of time. And I feel like if more people knew that, if, say, there was an opposition party that was telling people that on a regular basis and maybe putting ads on Facebook targeting MAGA to tell them, hey, this is what these people say behind your back, then I think there would be a lot more public knowledge and a way to stop these guys. And I think Trump can't really... The thing about the situation with Musk, first we have to keep in mind that Trump just made billions of dollars in meme coin money a few days before taking office. So if something weird is happening there, it's already old news. But, you know, if Kamala had made several $1 billion on a meme coin, we would never stop hearing about it. So Trump's complicity and compliance may be bought and paid for to some degree, but he has some severability here, right? If things go far enough off the edge, he can always say, oh, Elon's gone and I didn't approve of that, and, you know, wave his magic wand and his followers will believe him. So I think that's kind of part of the idea, is that Elon, being the richest man in the world, being guaranteed a pardon by Trump no matter what he does or how it breaks the law, can come in and do as much damage as possible and face no consequences. And since he doesn't care what people think, giving a Hitler salute at the inauguration and whatnot, he can just go in there and be a honey badger and tear the government to shreds. And so I think that's part of the thinking here. It's part of the strategy, is that you have this shock and awe and these shock troops to destroy government. And if things get bad enough where it's not, where Trump can no longer brook that, then Elon can go into the background. It won't stop. The tactics will just change and become a little more subtle. Maybe the Project 2025 people then take the front seat and act like, well, all this destruction happened, but don't worry, we're rebuilding government and it's going to be better than ever. We're going to make the federal government great again. So they've thought ahead, I think, and I think they're probably using AI to help them think some of these things through too, because there's so much happening so quickly, so tuned into whatever might be trending or going. I think they're just running circles around everybody else, unfortunately. But at the same time, they're kind of stupid about politics to change all of this quickly, to do this much damage.
Hey guys, we spoke to Gil Duran on Crystal Kyle and Friends today. You're definitely going to want to check this out because we talk about why Elon Musk is doing what he's doing, what his ideology is, what's at the core of this. There's a guy by the name of Curtis Yarvin who's basically an evil philosopher, and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and all these guys, J.D. Vance, they all believe in his vision for the future. You're not going to want to miss this. You're going to learn about the Dark Enlightenment. You're going to learn about RAGE, Retire All Government Employees, as it's called. Sign up below to see the full interview that we did.